Some of you may know of the famous early 1800s horror writer, Edgar Allan Poe. Most of you have probably heard of Mario and Zelda. Yet it may surprise you to find that there may be some strange intersection between those two topics. I'm your host, Brayden64, and on this Halloween day, we'll be going over a few fairly convincing pieces of evidence that someone at Nintendo was secretly inspired by the late Edgar Allan Poe. On another note, this episode is meant to be a bit freaky, but if you want to see something real scary, you should look at all the wires behind my game area. It's like a sea of black tubes. First, let's lay everything out. Edgar Allan Poe was a horror writer in the early 1800s. He has written some pretty famous works. I've read some of them, and they're pretty good. Poe led a strange life, and ended up marrying his 13-year-old cousin at the age of 25. But I'm not going to delve into his creepo level. What I'll be focusing on today is Poe's last name, as well as his story, The Pit and the Pendulum. Let's start with his last name, Poe. You may recognize that as the name of a Zelda enemy. They are both spelled the same, lending some credibility to the theory. First introduced in 1992's Link to the Past, the Poe is a ghostly creature that has appeared in many games since. Usually characterized by tattered clothes and an eerie lantern, they reside around graves and other dark, somewhat spooky areas in Zelda games. Given that Edgar Allan Poe is a horror writer, it would make sense. Our next piece of data has to do with the story The Pit and the Pendulum. I wouldn't be surprised if you've heard the name before. It is extremely similar to the second star in the Super Mario 64 stage, Tick-Tock Clock. The star's name is The Pit and the Pendulums, as opposed to The Pit and the Pendulum. It seems strange that something in a kid's game would be named after a story about torture, but I guess it makes sense with all that Super Mario 64 iceberg stuff going around these days. Well, there's the data. And now we can talk about why I think these references might have been placed there. Right after I concocted this theory, I instantly went to check the credits for Super Mario 64, Link to the Past, as well as Ocarina of Time, where Poe's became more fleshed out. Or at least, as fleshed as a ghost could be. Anyways, I first found out that all three games were created by the Nintendo EAD division, although the staff was quite different for each game. A few names stood out at first. Of course, Shigeru Miyamoto was in all of them. It seemed unlikely that he would be responsible for the naming of enemies and stages, though. He was in leadership positions in all three games. Next, I turned to Yoshiaki Koizumi. It seemed possible that he was the man responsible. He was assistant director on Super Mario 64, worked on printed art, basically manual stuff, on Link to the Past, and was a 3D system designer and character modeler on Ocarina of Time. It seemed possible that Koizumi could have named these two things, but not quite likely. Both things had altered names here in the West. In Japan, Poe was spelled differently, and The Pit and the Pendulums translates differently, being more like Pendulum's Room. So then, I decided to check the translation team for all three games, and voila, I found that Hiroyuki Hiro Yamada translated all of them. Now, as far as I can tell, people haven't really dug very deep on this subject before, so I don't believe anyone has ever really interviewed Hiro about whether or not he is a fan of Edgar Allan Poe or not. I searched for quite a while, yet I couldn't find any definitive proof that Yamada is a Poe fan. However, he is the most likely candidate to be responsible for the two occurrences. In conclusion, I believe Hiro Yamada is responsible for the two possible references to Edgar Allan Poe and his works. Who knows, maybe someday this mystery will be definitively solved. Maybe someone will interview all the people who worked on those games about this situation. But for now, all we can do is speculate. This has been Brayden64. Hello, loyal viewers. I hope you enjoyed this Halloween special. I made that connection between Edgar Allan Poe and those two Nintendo instances after learning about him in school, and I thought it would make a great Halloween episode. I think I've really been getting the hang of making videos. While the last video took a whole month to make, I was able to knock this one out in 2 days. Hopefully, that means I'll be able to publish a lot more. make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you stay up to date on any new uploads. The next video might be another Let's Play, so look out for that. Now, I must go back to wallowing in my home like everyone else is these days.